I was standing in front of my third grade class when I died. What happened in the 4.5 minutes that followed is the reason I'm telling you this story. And what I was shown during that time is the answer to why you feel the way you feel right now. Every morning for almost a year, I opened my Bible before anyone else in the house was awake. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold beside me, and I read. I prayed. I did everything I had always done. And every single morning, it felt like I was speaking into a room where nobody was home. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old. I teach third grade, and I have loved God my entire adult life. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. Because what happened to me wasn't the story of someone who walked away from faith. It was the story of someone who did everything right and still felt completely, inexplicably alone. Maybe you know exactly what I'm describing. Not the dramatic abandonment, not the crisis of belief, just the quiet, creeping feeling that something has gone wrong and you don't know what, and you're too afraid to say it out loud because everyone around you seems fine. Everyone else at church seems like their prayers are reaching somewhere real. Yours feel like they hit the ceiling and fall back down. That was me. For 8 months, that was my life. My husband Daniel noticed before I admitted it to myself. He's 42, a contractor, steady and patient in the way that good men are, and one Tuesday morning, he set his coffee mug down and asked me if I was okay. I said yes. I said it easily, automatically, the way you say it when you've been saying it so long, you've stopped hearing yourself say it. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Then he nodded and picked up his mug and went back to getting ready for work. He didn't push. He never pushed. But I could see in his eyes that he knew I was lying, not to him, but to myself. There was a reason the door had stopped opening, and it had nothing to do with God moving away. I didn't know that yet. I thought maybe I had done something wrong and couldn't figure out what. I thought maybe my faith had simply dried up the way things do, the way you can love a song for years, and then one day it just doesn't reach you anymore. I thought maybe God was teaching me something through the silence, and I needed to wait it out. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see yet, was where the wall had come from, or what I had used to build it. The last 8 months of my life before the collapse looked, from the outside, completely normal. I kept every spiritual habit I'd built over 20 years of following Christ. Morning prayer, weekly church, a small group on Wednesday nights. I volunteered in the children's ministry. I showed up. I checked every box. But something had shifted inside me, quietly and gradually, and I had never once noticed it happening. There was a woman in my congregation named Patricia. I had decided, sometime in those 8 months, that she was spiritually shallow. She cried during worship every single Sunday, very visibly, in a way I found excessive. She talked about God the way you talk about a best friend, casually, almost informally, and something in me recoiled at it. I told myself I had discernment. I told myself I could simply see that her faith was more emotional than grounded. I never said a word of this to anyone. I just held it, quietly, in the back of my heart, like a filing cabinet of assessments I'd made about people's spiritual lives. Patricia, a few others. The way so-and-so prayed at the wrong length. The way someone else interpreted a passage I thought they'd gotten wrong. I called it discernment. I called it standards. It never once occurred to me to call it what it was. There was also a shift in how I prayed. I had somewhere along the way developed the sense that it was spiritually mature to handle ordinary things myself. Small annoyances, daily stresses, the friction of a hard week. I stopped bringing those to God. I didn't want to be the person who bothered God with minor inconveniences. I saved prayer for real crises, significant needs, things that felt worthy of divine attention. I thought this was maturity. I thought I was being appropriately independent rather than demanding. What I had actually done was quietly remove God from the texture of my daily life. And then I was confused about why our connection felt distant and thin. And there was one other thing. A decision I'd made 3 years earlier. Something I still thought about late at night with with a low-grade shame that never quite went away. I had forgiven the people involved. I had genuinely worked through it. But I had never, not once, forgiven myself. I just kept returning to it, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. It always did. None of these three things felt like sin. That was exactly the problem. I was building something I couldn't see, and I was about to find out what it had cost me. It was a Wednesday when I collapsed at school. I was standing at the whiteboard, 32 8-year-olds in front of me, and then I wasn't standing anywhere at all. I found out later it was a cardiac event, documented, real, physically explicable in the way these things are. My aide called 911. The paramedics came. These are the facts of what happened on the outside. I can recite them because people needed to hear them, because the reality of it mattered. This was not a dream, not a metaphor, not something I half remember from anesthesia. What I remember from the inside is different. Would I find what I had feared? Would this long stretch of silence mean I had been right? That the God I had been reaching for had simply stopped reaching back? These questions rose in me the moment everything went quiet, and then they were replaced by something I could not have anticipated. I remember silence first. A silence so complete it had texture, like stepping out of a city into a field where no wind is moving. And then weightlessness. And then fear, rising fast, because I understood what was happening, and I did not know what I was about to find. For nearly a year, I had felt like God was far away. Now I was moving toward whatever was on the other side of that distance, and I was terrified of what the answer would be. And then, very suddenly, the fear was gone. Not because I decided to let it go. It left the way nausea leaves when fresh air hits you. It simply was not there anymore. Something else was. There are no words that are adequate for what I experienced next. I've spent 2 years trying to find them, and I want to be honest with you. What I'm about to describe is smaller than what it actually was. Language is a small container for something this size. I was somewhere that had no walls, no floor, no ceiling, no architecture at all, only light. But the light wasn't empty the way light is. It had weight to it, warmth, the quality of being held. And present within that light was something, someone, that I recognized the way you recognize a voice you've known your whole life but haven't heard in years. More familiar than anything I had ever encountered. More real than the world I had just left. I want to say it felt like heaven because that's the word I had, but it wasn't a place. It was a presence. And the presence was not far away. It was so close it was surrounding me, which after so long feeling alone with my prayers was the most overwhelming thing I had ever experienced. I expected accusation. After carrying the assumption that I'd done something wrong, I had arrived expecting to find out what it was, expecting either silence or judgment. What I found was being known, completely known. Every part of me seen, including the parts I had carefully organized into filing cabinets and closed away, including the bruise I kept pressing, including the quiet assessments I'd made of Patricia's faith. Everything visible. And yet I was not let go. I was held in the seeing, which was the part I could not have prepared for. The first thing the presence communicated was not an answer. It was a question, and the question opened everything. He asked me simply, "Do you know what you've been carrying?" I did not know how to answer that. I thought I did. I thought I'd been carrying confusion and spiritual dryness and the frustration of praying at a closed door. But he wasn't asking about what I'd been carrying. He was asking if I could see what I'd been building. The first thing he showed me was Patricia. Not Patricia herself. What I had been doing with Patricia. I saw it from outside myself for the first time, the way you see a behavior in someone you love before you can see it in yourself. I had been quietly ranking people's faith, positioning mine above theirs. I called it discernment, but discernment is a gift oriented toward serving people and protecting community. What I had been doing was using perceived spiritual insight to separate myself from others, to judge from a distance rather than love up close. Every quiet assessment I made of someone's faith was a brick. Every time I decided I was reading the room better than the person crying in the front row, I had moved further from God, not closer. You cannot build walls between yourself and other people without also building them between yourself and the one who created those people. Judgment closes the heart. A closed heart cannot receive. Then he showed me the second thing. I had a student that fall, a boy struggling in ways I could see but felt inadequate to fix. I remember a Tuesday in October, tired, worried about him, when I organized the entire support plan myself. I held the parent meetings, sent every email, managed it completely. I never once brought him to prayer. He felt too ordinary, too small, too much like asking for help with my homework. He showed me that Tuesday, and then he showed me how many Tuesdays there had been like it. I had been treating God the way you treat someone you admire too much to burden, quietly removing the ordinary, the daily, the small, until what remained was a relationship I only visited in crisis. And I understood, standing there in that light, that intimacy requires access. Not just access during emergencies. Access to the ordinary Tuesday, the irritating commute, the small anxiety about a difficult parent. I had been leaving God out of my ordinary routines and then wondering why his presence felt so faint. Self-sufficiency was not maturity. It was distance I had dressed up as virtue. And it had worked. I had successfully managed my own life, and in the process, I had made myself unreachable. The third thing was the hardest. He brought me back to the decision I had made 3 years earlier, the one I had replayed hundreds of times, the bruise. And what he showed me, quietly, without drama, without any trace of accusation, was the gap. Not between me and forgiveness, because I had received that. The gap was between what I offered others and what I would accept for myself. I had extended grace to everyone who had ever wronged me. I had been generous, patient, genuinely forgiving. But when it came to myself, I had held a different standard. I had been withholding the same mercy I preached. And self-unforgiveness is still unforgiveness. The grace you refuse to receive cannot flow through you. You cannot give freely from a vessel you've decided you're not allowed to fill. Those were the 3 things he showed me. Not sins I would have named, not on any list I would have assembled of what was wrong with my faith. But they were the wall, every brick accounted for. I came back. The doctors would say later that I was resuscitated after 4.5 minutes. I spent 2 days in the hospital, a lot of it in a stunned kind of quiet, trying to hold on to what I had been shown. The fluorescent light of the hospital room had a different quality than the light I had just come from. The revelation that had been so clear, so undeniable in that space, was already beginning to feel fragile, like something you dream and then watch fade in the morning. But I remembered. I wrote it down on a napkin because I didn't have anything else, and I folded it and put it in my hand and held it. The revelation was real. Living it was still going to be work. Daniel was at my bedside when I woke up. He looked exhausted. He had been there since it happened. He reached for my hand, and I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time since the silence began. And I felt something unlock in my chest that I hadn't realized was locked. He didn't know what had happened. I didn't try to explain it then. But something had already shifted, and he could feel it. And I watched relief move across his face like light moving across water. The weeks after I came home were not simple. The NDE was not a reset button. It was a clarity, and clarity still requires action. What changed was that now I could see the wall. I could see where I'd been placing bricks without realizing it, and I could choose differently. It started small. I caught myself one morning assembling a quiet assessment of someone at church, and I stopped. Not with shame. Shame was part of what I was releasing, but with recognition. I put it down. I let the thought pass without giving it a home. And the next Sunday, I stood near Patricia during worship, and she cried during the third song, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. warmth, not judgment. The difference between those two experiences was startling. I started bringing the small things to prayer, the friction of a difficult week, the low-grade anxiety about a student I was worried about, the irritations I had decided were too minor to mention. I stopped editing my prayer life for spiritual professionalism and started actually talking, and the quality of the silence afterward changed entirely. The hardest work took longer. Sitting with that old decision and choosing, really choosing, for the first time, to apply the same grace to myself that I had always offered others. It wasn't a single moment. It was a series of mornings where I had to choose it again, where I had to say out loud what I had been telling everyone else for years. You are forgiven. Completely. Stop pressing the bruise. One morning I noticed the small wooden cross on the kitchen wall. It had hung there for 6 years. I had no memory of the last time I'd actually seen it. I stood there for a moment and felt something settle in me, quietly, like a room returning to the temperature it was always meant to be. Daniel came downstairs while I was standing there with my coffee, not reading, just standing. He looked at me across the kitchen and he smiled. He said, "You seem like yourself again." I told him that I finally met myself again. He didn't understand what I meant yet. He would, eventually, when I found the words to tell him. But in that moment, it was enough. The door was open. Not because God had changed, but because I had stopped building walls I didn't know I was building. I want to speak to you now, because the wall I was building, you may be building yours right now and not know it yet. If you found this video because you feel spiritually disconnected, I want to ask you something. When was the last time someone at church did something that you privately evaluated as spiritually insufficient? Not the dramatic case, not overt sin, just someone whose faith looked different from yours, shallower, louder, less grounded. If you can think of a person, I want you to ask yourself whether you're using discernment to serve them or using it to separate yourself from them. Because judgment and discernment can wear the same face, and only one of them closes the heart. And this: how much of your life have you brought to God this week? Not the emergencies, the Tuesday, the small irritation, the passing worry, the moment of loneliness at noon when nobody was watching. Have you been handling things yourself because you don't want to bother the God who runs the universe with your ordinary life? Because intimacy requires access to the ordinary. If you've been treating your daily struggles as too insignificant for prayer, the gap you're feeling is one you've created, and it can close. And the last one, which is the hardest: who is the one person you have never fully forgiven? If the answer is yourself, you are not alone. This is the one we most often skip. We extend grace everywhere except inward. We talk about a compassion we deny our own hearts, and the forgiveness you withhold from yourself becomes a dam, blocking the very peace you're trying to pour out. These were the 3 walls between me and God. Not dramatic sins, not obvious failures, hidden ones disguised as virtues. Reconnection is not earned. You do not perform your way back to the sense of God's presence. You receive your way back by removing what you have placed between you and the source of it. The door was never locked from the outside. If you needed to hear that today, I hope you did. If this spoke to you, if you felt yourself recognized somewhere in this story, leave a comment below and share what you're carrying. You don't have to explain everything. Just say what you're ready to say. Sometimes naming it is where it starts. And if you know someone who has gone quiet about their faith, someone who used to talk about it and just stopped, this might be the thing they need to hear. Send it to them. Sometimes that's the kindest thing you can do.